through 13 weeks of the NFL season, and given it's December, we are in the home stretch and all starting to think about and talk about what the playoff picture is going to look like. But in order to understand what the playoff picture could look like, we need to know which teams are hot and which teams are not. And so that's what this week's iteration of the power rankings are for, to see who is trending up and who is trending not so well. But before we get into the video, as always, I want to take a second to please ask you to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us out. Again, this is a new format, a little bit more podcast style. It's all one take, so I might screw up a bit in here, but I hope you enjoy it. And we're going to do this for the next little bit until we're able to, find a long-term editor that works with the schedule that I have. And so now let's get into our bottom 12 teams. I typically don't talk about these bottom 12 teams a lot because, there's not a lot to talk about. The bottom 10 of these are just, they're not in it. We don't need to talk about them all. The two we might need to quickly touch on are the Atlanta Falcons and the Indianapolis Colts. The Atlanta Falcons are leading their division. They're 6-6 and in the playoffs because their division is absolutely trash. And, looking at it, we have the Panthers here at 26 and the Saints at 27th, who are divisional mates. So the Falcons are the second highest team in their division. The problem is there is one team that is higher than them, but has dealt with some injuries in the past. And given the Falcons beat them both times when they were dealing with injuries, at least one of them they were dealing with injuries, it's still a neck-and-neck race. But with how the Falcons have looked recently, I have to drop them to 22. They're on a 3-game losing streak. Kirk Cousins has looked awful. It's creating a quarterback controversy with Michael Penix. And so we'll see what happens, but this team is definitely on the downswing right now. As for the Indianapolis Colts, they are fighting for playoffs, which is actually surprising. They are 6-7. Yeah, wins by the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans last week didn't help their playoff case, but this is still a team that's not too far out of the playoffs, and if they get hot and Anthony Richardson plays like he has in a couple of his recent weeks, not all of them, but a couple of them, then absolutely the Indianapolis Colts could scare some teams and make a playoff push come the end of the season. So a team to watch, but they still belong here in the bottom 12 because of their inconsistency. Now, let's move into our middle 10 teams. And the biggest note here is the 49ers falling down to 20th. They were number 2 to start the season. They went to the Super Bowl last year, and they're number 20. I tried to keep them above water for a long time because of how talented this team was. But the fact of the matter is, they've now lost Christian McCaffrey for the season. They've lost Jordan Mason for the season. Nick Bosa's not playing a lot. They've lost Ayuk for the season. Brock Purdy has actually done his thing this year, but he is coming off an injured shoulder on his throwing arm. And we don't know how good he's going to be because, yeah, he played last week, but that was in a snow bowl where he didn't play well. But was that due to his shoulder or due to it being a snow bowl? We don't know. And so the 49ers, while not out of the playoff picture, they're in trouble. They're a losing record team. They're at max going to get 10 wins. That's if they win out and they have a tough schedule remaining. This team, frankly, belongs down here at number 20. Other teams to note here, you have the Houston Texans who are leading that division, but they don't look great. They barely beat the Jacksonville Jaguars this past week, 23-20, when they knocked Trevor Lawrence out of that game early and primarily had to deal with Mac Jones. This team is probably going to make the playoffs only because their divisional opponents are the Colts, who we previously talked about, as well as the Titans and, the Jaguars. That's who I was blanking on for a second there. And those three teams are not good. So the Texans will make the playoffs, but they're going to be the 4th seed in the AFC almost certainly. And whoever is the number 1 wildcard team at the moment, I believe it is the Los Angeles Chargers. They're going to have a great matchup in the first week of the playoffs because I would take that road team over the Texans every day of the week with what I've seen from the Texans lately. The last two teams that kind of warrant some conversation here is going to be the Seattle Seahawks. They are a good team. I don't know. They didn't look good for a lot of the season. They got 3 early wins against bad teams, and then they started to play really bad. But they picked it up lately. They're 7-5. They're leading the division. And yeah, this division is still up for grabs. Every single one of the the NFC West teams is in this middle 10, which shows you how close the division is. But the Seahawks currently have the inside track. They have a good divisional record. And you know what? Hey, they could go and make the playoffs winning the NFC West. And right now, that would be the 3 seed because of how bad the NFC South is. And so, Seahawks getting the 3 seed, I wouldn't have thought of it. They're not the 3rd best team in the NFC. In fact, they're probably 6th best, but with how the playoffs work, they would get the 3 seed right now. And the final team is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're at 13th, even though they're not even in the playoff picture right now, but they have clearly been the best team in the NFC South. They're actually a very competent team in the NFC South. They've beaten the Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles. 2 of those teams combined 3 losses are at the hand of the Buccaneers. This is a good team that just dealt with significant injuries in the middle part of the season and struggled because of it. They've overcome them now. They have a really easy end of the season schedule. I think only one medium tough matchup remaining. And so the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should be able to put forth a really good record. They have a good chance of leapfrogging the Falcons and maybe even the Seahawks and getting the 3 seed in the NFC, which would be wild. But I mean, it's certainly possible for them. So definitely a team to keep our eyes out for. And now we can move into the meaty part of our power rankings, the top 10, starting with the Los Angeles Chargers. They are 8-4. They are in this first wild card spot in the AFC. They're holding pat at 10. You know, this is just a good team. They are going to make the playoffs. I don't think there's much of a chance they miss the playoffs. They are going to have a big test this coming week when they play against the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that has had a really good record and won a lot of games, but hasn't looked that good. So that's going to be the real litmus test for the Chargers. Can they compete against a good team that might be struggling? And that's going to tell you, can this team go and actually win some playoff games? Right now, I'm not totally sold they can beat anybody else that's currently in the playoffs from the AFC, minus the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans. But, you know, if they go and beat the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to have to change my tune on the Chargers from, you know, happy to be here in the playoffs to they're looking to win year 1 in the Harbaugh era, which, I mean, just goes to show you how good a coach Harbaugh is. Like, come on, this guy's amazing. At number 9, holding pat at number 9, we have the Denver Broncos. They are actually the 3rd wildcard team in the AFC, but they are still ahead of the Los Angeles Chargers because I just think they've looked better than the Chargers in many of the recent weeks. The Broncos did not start the season well. They started the season honestly kind of bad, and that's just because I think Bo Nix was a rookie quarterback and they were still figuring their thing out. Bo Nix has become a Rookie of the Year candidate, genuinely. He actually has a very good shot at getting Rookie of the Year, especially if Jaden Daniels falls off. I think the narrative is still to give it to Daniels because he was good a little bit earlier and because the Commanders were a little bit worse of a team and frankly just because he's more exciting to watch and the Commanders had a higher pick this past year. But the Denver Broncos are a team that shouldn't have been anything, but they are something because Bo Nix is really, really good at quarterback. We got to start acknowledging that he's legit. He might be one of the best quarterbacks from this class that looks like a very, very good quarterback class. I mean, literally nobody can you constitute as a bust. People might be saying Caleb Williams, but at least his stats lately have looked fine. Like, I'm not saying amazing, but more than adequate enough for a rookie quarterback. Drake Mays looked good. Bo Nix has looked good. Obviously, Jaden Daniels has looked good. And, I mean, then we haven't really seen J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, so we can't talk about how good they are. But everyone who's played looks like a hit. So, good QB draft for sure. Broncos are here at number 9, and they're going to still need to keep playing to make the playoffs, given they are in the final wild card of the AFC. But, you know, they look good, and I think they'll be able to hold on to it. At number 8, we have the second wild card seed in the AFC, the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah, this is a little bit out of order of seed, but that's just because we're basing it off of how good these teams are. And the Baltimore Ravens, in spite their 8-5 record, are a very good football team. The problem is, and I've said it over and over on this channel, they just don't always show up. They sometimes just decide, we're not really going to show up and play hard this game. And that's kind of what's happened a few times. Yeah, they've had some tough losses against good teams. Like, they've lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's a good team. The Philadelphia Eagles. That's a good team. The Kansas City Chiefs. That's a good team. But they've also lost to the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, it was Jameis Winston's Cleveland Browns. It's a mediocre team, but still shouldn't be beating the Baltimore Ravens. And they lost to the Raiders, who are like one of, if not the worst teams in the NFL. So this team is inconsistent. They've struggled against good competition. Yeah, they have beat some good competition. I'm not saying they haven't. They beat the Bengals twice, but I mean, the Bengals are also 4-8. Like, a lot of teams have beat the Bengals. They beat the Chargers, but I've already talked about how I don't think the Chargers are really competing in the AFC. They're more of a happy to be here. The Ravens just haven't shown me that they can beat good teams. And while Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry have put up gaudy stats, those stats aren't turning into good wins. They're turning into decent wins. And so it's tough to put the Baltimore Ravens any higher than 8. I know we want to because of what we've seen from that offense and how exciting they are. But the record and who they've won and lost against has not given me confidence in this Ravens team. And so 8 is as high as I think we can all put them. Next up, moving on to number 7, we have the 9-3 Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers, a very good football team. They won pretty handily in Lambeau against the Miami Dolphins. Now, who knows how much of that was due to the Green Bay Packers winning that game or Miami, shrinking in the cold as they always do. I don't know. You don't know. None of us know. But what we do know is that the Green Bay Packers are really, really good at football. This is a very complete team. They have players at basically every position in the league. Their free agent signings in Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney have absolutely brought this team to being very good to great. They are 9-3. However, that's only good enough for third in their division. Yet, as we talked about, the Atlanta Falcons at 6-6 are leading their division in the same conference. The Seattle Seahawks at 7-5 are leading their division in the same conference. The Green Bay Packers are getting a little bit cheated, but so is everybody else in the NFC North, to be clear, because everyone else in any other division would have already walked away with the division, much like what the Buffalo Bills have done over in the AFC. But the Green Bay Packers at 9-3, they're in the 7 spot. 7 is a really good spot to be in because when you look at the remaining 6 teams, they all have gaudy stats and gaudy records too. I think the top 8 is a clear top 8, and the Packers are at number 7 in that top 8. And at number 6, we have the 10-2 Minnesota Vikings. Basically, the reason the Vikings are ahead of the Packers is because the Vikings beat the Packers, and that's the reason they're 10-2 when the Packers are 9-3. That's just it. The Minnesota Vikings have been amazing this year. They have not looked as good in recent weeks. I will fully acknowledge that. But they are still getting wins. And we have seen them beat good teams earlier in the season. And unlike with the Houston Texans, it feels like this team is still able to ride the defense, and they're still really good players that could pick it up. Like, Justin Jefferson has not done much in recent weeks in these wins. When I look at a guy like Justin Jefferson, I trust that when push comes to shove, Justin Jefferson can get his. And so the fact that the Minnesota Vikings have been able to win when we haven't seen the best football from Justin Jefferson, that's what gives me confidence in the Minnesota Vikings' ability to still win games and to still put up stats, as well as a really, really solid defense that they can back up on if the offense struggles for a little bit during the middle of games. This is a well-coached team. They're 10-2 for a reason. One of their losses is to the Detroit Lions, who have 1 loss in total, so you can't really knock them for that one. And so, yeah, Minnesota Vikings, hell of a good football team. They're winning consistently. They belong here at number 6. And at number 5, at 9-3, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers holding pat from where they were last week on the power rankings. I don't know how many times I need to say it. This team belongs to be this high on the rankings. And I finally think other power rankings are starting to give the Steelers the same level of credit I've been giving them for like a month now. I've had the Steelers in the top 10 for probably close to 2 months. I've had them near and around the top 5 for close to a month. And nobody else has been doing that. But I keep telling you, this defense is awesome. And the offense is pretty darn good too. Russell Wilson has unlocked a new level to this offense. They have a 2-headed rushing attack. It's not amazing, but it's more than capable. George Pickens is a stud at catching jump balls, at doing what he needs to on those 3rd and longs, at making, big chunk plays that Russell Wilson can do that guys like Fields and Trubisky and Pickett and Rudolph and Devlin Duck Hodges, etc. could not do. And so this team is really good. Mike Tomlin's a fantastic coach. They belong here at number 5. And if you're still doubting the Steelers, stop it. They're good. Stop doubting them. Just figure it out. They're good. Move on. Number 5. Number 4, holding pat as well, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs, yeah, they're 11-1. It's a good record. But their wins lately, oh my God, their wins lately have been brutal. Like, they won thanks to a, botched snap against the Raiders. They had to take a last-second field goal to beat the Panthers. a blocked field goal is the only reason they beat the Broncos, and I acknowledge the Broncos are a good team, but when you need a blocked field goal to beat a team that you should still be with an 11-run record significantly better than, this has not been a team that has shown me a lot lately, and their defense is what worries me. I've said a lot this season that I'm not worried about the Chiefs because I think Patrick Mahomes will turn it on come the playoffs, and I still think he will. But the defense has not been as good as it was at the beginning of the season and last season, and the fact that the defense hasn't been as good is what worries me about this team, because that's what you had to rely on. You could rely on the defense and say, yeah, their wins aren't that great, but Patty Mahomes will turn it on in the playoffs. But now, if Patty Mahomes turns it on in the playoffs, I'm not convinced their team or their defense can hold teams as well. And so that's why I'm knocking them down to number 4 on these power rankings. At number 3, we have the Detroit Lions. Now, this is probably the most shocking ranking I have in these power rankings. How are the Detroit Lions number 3, you say? Aren't you a Detroit Lions fan? How are you knocking an 11-1 Lions team that is far and away being the most dominant team in the NFL down to number 3? They're tied with the Chiefs for the best record. They have looked the most dominant of any team. They haven't lost since week 2. Explain yourself, Drew. Explain yourself. Well, that's what I'm here to do, baby. That's why we do these power rankings. And the Lions are number 3, not because of what they've done in the past, but because of what their team looks like right now. Their team, specifically their defense, is in shambles. I mean, the number of players this team is missing. If you're a fan of another team, you're like, oh, my team's missing players too. No, you do not understand. The Lions right now are missing their cornerback 1, their cornerback 3, their linebacker 1, their linebacker 3, their linebacker 4, their linebacker 5, their defensive end 1, their defensive end 2, their defensive end 3, their defensive end 4, their defensive tackle 3, their defensive tackle 4. It's insane what they are missing. Aiden Hutchinson, Alex Anzalone, Carlton Davis might be missing the game. Ennis Rakestraw's on IR. John Comiskey, Malcolm Rodriguez. The list goes on and on and on. The Lions have the most players on injured reserve in the league, 15 players. The Lions have the most players on injury designation as well. The nice thing about this team, for Lions fans, for me, is that these injuries are all expected to come back by the playoffs. And the Lions have all but locked up a playoff spot. But the Lions might not win this division because of how close the Packers and the Vikings are. The fact that the Lions don't have an easy schedule remaining. They have both the Packers and Vikings. They have the 49ers. They have the Bears. They have the Bills. That is honestly a tough remainder of the schedule for the Lions. They're going to be missing a ton of players. Yeah, they traded for Zadarius Smith at the trade deadline, but that does not cover all of their losses and all of their depth. And so I'm not convinced the Detroit Lions will have the best next few weeks. And so I'm knocking them down to number 3, not because I don't think this is going to be the best team come the playoffs, but because right now, their defense just isn't going to be the same unit it was earlier this season, and they're going to struggle for a couple weeks. At number 2, moving up one spot primarily just because of that Lions drop, is the Philadelphia Eagles. They're 10-2. They look really damn good. Again, I'm not sold on their passing attack. Jalen Hurts has not impressed me this year at all. But Saquon Barkley deserves to be in the MVP conversation, and the defense of the Eagles has become one of the best units in the entire NFL. They also benefit from the fact that, unlike the Lions, they're not as injured. And I mean, that can be said about any team in the NFL, but again, they don't really have many stars that are out of their lineup. They're looking really good. They've lost A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith for portions of the season, but again, their passing attack hasn't even been good with them in there, and they don't need it to be because Saquon Barkley is running the offense. Now, if they lost Saquon Barkley, I'd be dropping this team massively because I don't trust their ability to do anything on offense without him, but as long as he's there, and as long as the defense keep doing what the defense be doing, this team belongs at number 2, and they're the best team in the NFC until the Detroit Lions defense gets healthy. And I hate to say that as a Lions fan, but you know what? It's just true. And at number 1, also at 10-2, we have the Buffalo Bills. They've already locked up the division. I mean, they could, with a win this week and a Chiefs loss, take over the number 1 seed in the AFC, which is crazy because they hold the tiebreak against the Chiefs, given the Chiefs' lone losses to the Buffalo Bills. The Bills, like, literally just were playing with their food against the San Francisco 49ers this past week. Josh Allen had a rushing touchdown, a passing touchdown, and a receiving touchdown in the same game in a Snow Bowl. This dude is a freak. This team is really, really good. They are the best team in the AFC. I've said it before, though. I'll say it again. I still think the Ravens beat them if they go head-to-head like they did earlier this season. But I think the Bills can take down teams like the Chiefs and the Steelers that the Ravens can't take down. And so I like the Bills as the best team in the AFC. And thanks to the Lions' defensive woes with injuries, that allows the Bills to move to number one on our power rankings. And finally, as always, at the end of these power rankings, we talk about Thursday Night Football. And this week's Thursday Night Football is a really good matchup. It is two top 10 teams, the Green Bay Packers visiting the Detroit Lions. And the extra nice thing about this matchup is that because these teams both played on Thanksgiving this past week, they actually have a full week to prepare for this game. It's not like most Thursday Night Football games where you go from Sunday and then go to Thursday. No, these teams were last Thursday. They have a normal 1 week period to prepare for this game. So it should be a little bit cleaner than past Thursday Night Football games have been. This is usually one of the best Thursday Night Football games of the season, the week after Thanksgiving, because they usually try to do this, have two Thanksgiving Day teams go and play the next week to, prevent teams from going on shorter rest as much as possible. In this game, the Detroit Lions are at home, and they were able to beat the Green Bay Packers pretty easily in Lambeau Field earlier this season, but that was also when Jordan Love was just coming back from a hip injury. He did not look that good in that game. On the flip side, the Detroit Lions were a significantly healthier unit. Yeah, they were missing Aiden Hutchinson. They'd be missing him for most of the season. But outside of that, they had guys like Alex Anzalone, Carlton Davis, Malcolm Rodriguez, etc. Like, this team was still quite healthy at the time, missing some guys, but not as many guys. And so even though this game is in Detroit, Detroit is clearly the better team if both these teams are healthy. And so it would make sense to pick the Lions in this one. I'm taking the Packers. I'm taking the upset here, and it's because of the Lions' injuries. Again, I think the Lions are extremely well coached by Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, and Ben Johnson as the coach and coordinators. I think they're an incredibly talented team. Obviously, I'm a fan of them. It's the best iteration of the Lions we've ever had. But the fact of the matter is that the Detroit Lions are so injured that even though I think this is a team that can deal with injuries and successfully dealt with the Aiden Hutchinson injury, there becomes a critical mass of injuries where you just can't do what you want to do. And when you're playing against a good team like the Green Bay Packers, they will exploit it. Look at last Thursday's football game. Look at what the Chicago Bears did in the first half versus the second half. Because the Lions suffered a bunch of those injuries in the second half. And that's what happened. Malcolm Rodriguez, as well as guys like, who am I missing? Josh Paschal, Levi Onwuzurike, etc. They all got injured in the late first half, early second half of that game. And once that happened, the Bears started to be able to drive successfully on the Lions. The Packers are a better team than the Bears. I think they'll be able to put up points on the Lions. And yes, this Lions offense is still more than good enough to play a shootout and win a shootout. But they're going to need to show up for a shootout. And I think that Xavier McKinney and this Green Bay Packers defense will do enough to win a bit of a shootout. And the Packers will win this game, handing the Lions their second loss of the season. Oh, my bad. Yeah. And so that's it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, remember to leave a like and comment down below. Help us out. Help us grow. We'll see you all on Saturday for our weekly pick'ems. I hope you all enjoy Thursday Night Football. Peace!